The morning started like most others. I was standing at the small kitchen counter in my apartment in Portland, rinsing a mug I'd already forgotten to drink from. The window was open just enough to let in street noise and the smell of wet pavement. It was quiet, ordinary, safe. My phone buzzed once on the counter. It was my sister-in-law, Rachel. She said very casually, "I hope you're ready. Once the company is officially ours, things are going to change." I remember drying my hands slowly on a towel. I didn't respond right away. I just stared at the screen and noticed my name reflected faintly in the glass. At the time, I didn't know why that sentence stayed with me. I only knew it didn't sit right. A few weeks later, my father handed me a sealed envelope and told me to put it somewhere safe. I didn't open it. I didn't ask questions. I just nodded and put it in my work bag. That envelope would matter later. Back then, my life was simple. I was 28, and I had been working at my father's manufacturing company since right after high school. Nothing glamorous. Early mornings, fluorescent lights, the steady hum of machines. I liked knowing where everything was supposed to be. My parents wanted me to go to college, maybe move out of state. I understood why. But I'd grown up watching my father build that business from nothing. I'd seen the late nights, the missed weekends, the quiet stress he tried to hide. Being there felt natural. I started at the bottom, inventory checks, filing, learning names, learning rhythms. Most people didn't treat me like the owner's daughter, especially Carl, one of the senior supervisors. He never softened his voice for me, never rushed explanations. He just showed me how things worked and waited to see if I paid attention. I did. My older brother Evan took a different path. He was 2 years ahead of me and went to school for business administration. He talked about leadership a lot, about vision, about where the company should go. His friends loved to joke about how easy his future would be once he took over. Rachel loved those conversations. She had a way of filling space. At family dinners, her bracelets clinked against the table when she talked. She liked nice restaurants, big plans, loud laughter. Evan seemed proud of that, like her confidence somehow reflected well on him. Whenever we crossed paths, Rachel would glance at my plain clothes or ask, half smiling, why I never did more with myself. I'd usually just shrug. I didn't feel the need to explain that I liked my routine, or that I didn't measure success the same way she did. Evan sometimes joined in, telling people I was still figuring things out. I didn't argue. At home, my mother would squeeze my hand under the table and change the subject. My father would listen quietly and say very little. He noticed everything. He always did. Over time, Evan and Rachel stopped coming around as much. When they did, it felt tense, like everyone was performing a role they hadn't practiced enough. Work stayed steady. My father focused on expansion. I focused on keeping things running smoothly. Some days, I barely noticed the passing hours. Then one evening, while we were reviewing reports in his office, my father paused mid-sentence. He pressed a hand to his chest and told me he felt tired. I told him we could finish later and reached for my phone. Before I could stand up, he pointed toward his desk drawer. "There's something for you in there," he said quietly. "If anything happens." I froze. The room felt suddenly too still. He didn't finish the sentence. I called for help. I remember the sound of sirens in the distance and the way the office lights flickered slightly. I remember sitting very still, hands folded, waiting for someone to tell me what to do next. And I remember thinking about that envelope in my bag. Then I waited. The hospital room was quiet in a way that didn't feel peaceful. Machines hummed softly, steady and indifferent. My mother sat by the bed, holding my father's hand with both of hers, as if warmth alone might be enough. He never woke up. Evan and Rachel were out of town when it happened, a resort trip they'd booked months earlier. I called, left messages, texted details. There was no response until the next afternoon, and even then, it was brief. Evan said they'd try to come back as soon as possible. They didn't. For the next 2 days, my mother and I handled everything. Phone calls, paperwork, quiet conversations with doctors and nurses who spoke gently, like they were afraid words might crack something fragile in us. I slept in a chair the first night and didn't really sleep at all. When Evan and Rachel finally arrived, it was the morning of the funeral. They walked in dressed carefully, like they were attending a formal event rather than saying goodbye. Rachel hugged my mother tightly, then stepped back and checked her phone. Evan clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "At least we made it." I didn't answer. At the service, Evan spoke confidently with distant relatives and longtime employees. He thanked people for coming, told them he'd take it from here. Rachel stayed close to him, nodding, smiling at the right moments. Afterward, during the reception, Evan commented on the food choices, said the coffee was too bitter. I reminded him, calmly, that my mother and I had approved everything together. He waved it off. "This is exactly why leadership matters," he said, not quietly. "People need direction." I noticed Carl standing a few feet away, his jaw tight, hands folded behind his back. He didn't say anything. Rachel leaned toward me and lowered her voice. "You should probably get used to listening more now. Evan's going to be very busy." I looked at her for a moment, then excused myself to help my mother. Later that afternoon, a man in a dark suit approached us. He introduced himself as Mr. Halverson, my father's attorney. His voice was measured, respectful. He said my father had asked him to be present when the family gathered. Evan straightened immediately. Rachel's eyes lit up in a way that made me uncomfortable. We moved into a smaller room near the back of the building. Employees filtered in quietly, standing along the walls. The air felt heavier there, like everyone was holding their breath. Mr. Halverson explained that my father had arranged his affairs carefully, that there were documents to review, that some things might come as a surprise. Evan smiled. Rachel squeezed his arm. When the attorney mentioned the company's valuation, Rachel whispered, not quite under her breath, "This is finally happening." Someone near the door let out a short laugh. It stopped just as quickly as it started. Mr. Halverson opened a folder and began reading. As the words settled into the room, Evan's expression changed. The color drained from his face, and his smile disappeared completely. Rachel leaned closer to the papers, confused. Evan read along, lips moving silently. Then he shook his head. "That's not right," he said, louder this time. "That can't be right." The room stayed quiet. Mr. Halverson didn't argue. He simply adjusted his glasses and continued, his voice even, his tone unchanged. I didn't say anything. I sat very still, listening. I could feel the envelope in my bag, tucked away where I'd left it weeks ago. Evan looked up suddenly, his eyes sharp. "There has to be a mistake," he said. "My father wouldn't do this." No one answered him. I folded my hands in my lap and waited. Mr. Halverson paused, not because Evan asked him to, but because the room needed it. He let the silence settle before speaking again. "This document," he said, tapping the page lightly, "was drafted over a year ago. It was reviewed multiple times. It was witnessed. It is valid." Evan stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Rachel followed him, her hand still gripping his arm. "You're saying she gets everything?" Evan asked, pointing at me without looking. "That doesn't make sense. I went to school for this. I prepared for this." Mr. Halverson nodded once. "Your father was aware of that." Rachel laughed, sharp and quick. "Then why would he leave the company to someone who's barely visible?" That was the first time I looked up. "I'm here every day," I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. Evan turned toward me fully. "Doing what? Filing papers? Watching other people work?" Carl shifted his weight slightly. I noticed. He still didn't speak. Mr. Halverson continued, as if no one had interrupted. "Your father also left a personal letter, not part of the will. It was addressed to Lucy." Every head turned toward me. I didn't reach for my bag yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I listened as Evan started pacing, running his hands through his hair. "This is ridiculous," he said. "He must have been under stress. People make bad decisions when they're sick." The attorney didn't react. "Your father requested a medical evaluation at the time the will was finalized. It's on record." Rachel's smile faded. Evan stopped pacing and looked at the employees lining the wall. "You all know I'm the right person for this," he said. "I've been networking, building relationships. That's leadership." No one moved. Carl finally stepped forward, just enough to be seen. "We don't need speeches," he said quietly. "We need consistency." Evan scoffed. "Of course you'd say that." Carl didn't respond. He looked at me instead, then back at Evan. "Your father valued people who stayed." That seemed to land harder than anything else. Rachel crossed her arms. "So what? Now we're supposed to listen to her?" she said. "She doesn't even look like a president." I reached into my bag then and placed the envelope on the table. It made a soft sound when it landed, barely noticeable. "This is from Dad," I said. "He told me to keep it safe." Mr. Halverson nodded. That letter outlines financial distributions made during your father's lifetime. Housing assistance, travel, personal expenses. Rachel's eyes widened. What does that have to do with anything? It means, I said, opening the envelope slowly, that what you've already received was considered your share. Evan shook his head. That's not how inheritance works. It is when it's documented, Mr. Halverson replied. I didn't read the letter out loud. I didn't have to. The numbers were clear. Dates, transfers, receipts, everything my father had quietly tracked over the years. Rachel sat down heavily. So the money everyone's talking about, the company funds, that's not personal? No, I said. It never was. The room felt different then, less charged, more focused. Evan looked around again, searching faces for support. He didn't find it. I closed the letter and slid it back into the envelope. We don't need to decide anything today, I said. But the structure doesn't change. Mr. Halverson gathered his papers. We'll proceed according to the will, he said. Formally, properly. No one argued. As the employees began to step out quietly, Carl paused beside me. He didn't smile. He just nodded once. I stayed seated after everyone else left, listening to the room empty. Then I waited. The days after the reading were quiet, but not calm. There's a difference. Quiet is when nothing is said. Calm is when nothing needs to be. What followed was mostly paperwork. I returned to the office the next Monday. Same parking spot, same entry code. The lobby smelled faintly of cleaning solution and old coffee. A few employees looked up when I walked in, then went back to their work without saying anything. That felt right. No speeches, no sudden shifts. I spent the morning reviewing access logs, account permissions, and pending approvals. Things my father and I had always handled together, usually without discussion. I didn't announce changes. I followed process. Step 1. Confirm authority. Mr. Halverson sent over the interim documentation by noon. Board acknowledgement. Temporary executive designation. Everything clean. Dated. Signed. Step 2. Stabilize operations. I approved payroll personally that week. Made sure vendor payments went out on time. Replied to emails Evan had ignored for months. Short responses. Clear answers. Step 3. Limit noise. I instructed HR to route all executive-level requests directly to me. No exceptions. No commentary. Evan didn't come in that week. Rachel did once. She walked through the office like it still belonged to her, heels clicking a little too loudly. She stopped by my desk and crossed her arms. So this is really happening, she said. Yes, I replied, still looking at my screen. She waited for more. I didn't give it to her. You know Evan's furious, she added. I know, I said. She leaned closer. You're tearing the family apart. I finally looked up then. No, I said evenly. I'm following what was already decided. She scoffed and left without saying goodbye. Later that afternoon, Carl came by with a folder. Inside were project timelines Evan had promised clients but never formalized. No contracts. No follow-through. We can fix this, Carl said. I know, I replied. One at a time. By the end of the week, Evan sent me an email. Long, emotional, accusatory. He questioned my qualifications. He questioned our father's judgment. He suggested mediation. I read it once. Then I forwarded it to legal and archived it. The following Monday, Evan showed up unannounced. He stood in the conference room, arms wide, like he was addressing an audience that wasn't there. He talked about vision, about respect, about how people needed to get on board. I listened. When he finished, I said, "This isn't how meetings are scheduled anymore." He stared at me. You can't just erase me? I'm not, I said, but you don't have an operational role. Rachel interrupted from the doorway. You're really enjoying this, aren't you? I shook my head. No, I'm maintaining order. I slid a printed document across the table. It listed missed obligations, unauthorized expenses, and the formal termination of his executive access, effective immediately. He didn't read it right away. He just laughed. You think a piece of paper makes you powerful? I stood up slowly. No, I said. Process does. He stopped laughing. Security didn't need to intervene. Evan left on his own, voice raised, words scattered and ineffective. Rachel followed, crying openly now. When the door closed, the room felt still again. I sat back down, straightened the folder Carl had brought earlier, and opened the next file. Then I waited. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded quietly, the way most real outcomes do. HR processed Evan's termination by the end of the week. No arguments, no appeals that held up under review. His remaining compensation was exactly what the documents outlined. Nothing more, nothing hidden. Rachel called me 2 days later. Her voice sounded different, lower, tired. "We're selling the house," she said. I didn't respond right away. I was sitting at my desk, reviewing supplier contracts my father had negotiated years earlier. His notes were still in the margins, small handwriting, careful. "That seems practical," I said. She exhaled sharply. "You could help us, just temporarily." I closed the folder in front of me. "I can't," I said, "and you know why." There was a pause on the line. Then the call ended. Over the next few months, I heard things indirectly. Evan picked up part-time work at a convenience store near their old neighborhood. Rachel found a cashier position through someone she knew. Neither job lasted long hours, but they were steady. No one from the company spoke about them much after that. There was work to do. Internally, things stabilized faster than I expected. Missed projects were reorganized, clients appreciated the follow-through. Carl and I met every Monday morning at exactly 8. Same table, same coffee. We talked through issues plainly and moved on. The company didn't grow overnight. It didn't need to. It became consistent, predictable, reliable. One afternoon, months later, my mother stopped by the office. She brought lunch and sat quietly while I finished a call. When I hung up, she smiled softly. "Your father would have liked this," she said. I didn't answer immediately. I looked around the space, the desks, the people moving with purpose, the systems working the way they were meant to. "I think he planned for it," I said. That evening, after everyone left, I stayed behind and organized a drawer in my office. Old keys, flash drives, a folded copy of the letter my father had written me. I put it back where it belonged. At home later, I made tea and stood by the sink, listening to it cool. The day felt complete. Not triumphant, just settled. I put the cup down, turned off the light, and let the quiet hold. Then I waited. Life eventually found a new rhythm. Most mornings now start the same way. I arrive early, unlock the office, and walk the floor once before sitting down. I straighten a chair here, pick up a stray paper there. Nothing urgent, just enough to remind myself that order is something you maintain, not something you declare. At home, things are quieter too. My mother visits on Sundays. We cook simple meals and talk about ordinary things. Weather, neighbors, small memories that don't hurt anymore. We don't talk about Evan unless there's a reason to. Distance, I've learned, can be a form of care. The company continues steadily. No dramatic leaps, no sudden collapses. Just work done properly, by people who know why they're there. Carl still brings me folders every Monday. We still disagree sometimes. We still solve things. A few weeks ago, someone I barely knew reached out through a mutual contact. A woman working quietly in her family's business, overlooked, assumed to be temporary. She asked if I had time to talk. I told her yes. Not because I had answers, but because I understood the position, the waiting, the silence, the moment when systems matter more than words. That's usually where real change begins. If you stayed with me through this story, thank you. If it felt familiar, you're not alone. If you found this calm or grounding, you might enjoy the next 2 stories that will appear shortly. They explore similar moments where patience quietly changes outcomes. Before you go, take a second to like and subscribe. It helps this space grow gently and reach people who might need it. And if you're comfortable, leave a comment telling me which city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. I read more of them than you might think. Take care of yourself. I'll see you next time.